Juneteenth, a day commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans, holds significant historical importance in the United States. But the Juneteenth celebration also serves as a solemn remembrance of the Tulsa Massacre, a horrifying act of racial violence and devastation that took place on May 31st and June 1st of that same year in Tulsa, Oklahoma's Greenwood District. This horrific event, which is frequently referred to as the Tulsa Race Massacre, represents a dark chapter in the history of the United States and highlights the ongoing struggle for racial justice and equality. It is of the utmost importance to investigate the gory specifics of this terrible event, recognize the lasting effects it has had, and work toward healing, reconciliation, and structural reform. The Greenwood District. Prior to the massacre, the Greenwood District of Tulsa, also known as Black Wall Street, thrived as a prosperous African American community. It was a thriving center of entrepreneurship, home to prosperous Black-owned companies, thriving cultural institutions, and a tight-knit neighborhood. Despite the widespread racism and segregation of the day, Greenwood served as a metaphor for Black tenacity, affluence, and community empowerment. The spark that ignited the Tulsa Massacre was an accusation of a Black man, Dick Rowland, assaulting a white woman, Sarah Page, in an elevator. An allegation that a Black man named Dick Rowland had assaulted a white woman named Sarah Page while they were both riding in an elevator served as the spark that ignited the Tulsa Massacre. Inflamed by racial tensions, sensationalized media coverage, and the use of language that was racially charged, a group of white people gathered outside the courthouse and demanded that Rowland be lynched. On the evening of May 31st, a group of white people, which was estimated to number in thousands, descended upon the Greenwood District and carried out an act of unprecedented violence, resulting in the Black community members' homes, businesses, churches, and schools were vandalized, burned down, and destroyed. Numerous people were killed during the rampage, and thousands were left homeless and traumatized. The once thriving Greenwood District was reduced to smoldering ruins, wiping out years of hard work, progress, and community-building efforts. Nevertheless, the massacre was denied and silenced. Following the Tulsa Massacre, there was a concerted effort to bury the truth and destroy any proof of the atrocity. Authorities exaggerated the violence's scope, misrepresented eyewitness accounts, and silenced the survivors. A culture of ignorance, denial, and systemic racism was maintained for decades as a result of the destruction of official records and the substantial omission of the incident from history books and public discourse. The Tulsa Massacre didn't start getting the attention it deserved until the 1990s. Survivors and their descendants bravely started telling their stories, pleading for justice, and demanding that the tragedy be recognized. In recent years, there have been initiatives to excavate mass graves and give reparations to survivors and their families, as efforts to learn the truth have gained momentum. A potent example of the community's resiliency and the value of remembering is the opening of the Greenwood Rising History Center in Tulsa. The survivors and their descendants will always bear the scars of the Tulsa Massacre, the trauma, suffering, and economic inequalities brought on by the destruction of Black Wall Street have been passed down through generations. Not only is acknowledging this historical injustice morally required, but it is also a crucial step toward healing and reconciliation. It is crucial to address the massacre's legacy by education and awareness, to ensure that future generations are aware of the extent of racial injustice in the United States. The history of racial violence, such as the Tulsa Massacre, should be incorporated into educational curricula at all levels. Systematic racism, white supremacy, and the historical contributions of Black Americans should all be covered in this education. Reparations and restitution, paying compensation and providing financial assistance to survivors and their heirs, acknowledging the generational effects of the Tulsa Massacre, and attempting to resolve the ongoing economic disparities. This includes initiatives to restore and revitalize the Greenwood District, make monetary amends, and provide the Black community with fair and equal access to the economy. Truth and reconciliation, promoting candid communication, truth-telling, and initiatives for collective healing that unite survivors, ancestors, and the larger community to confront the traumatic legacy of the Tulsa Massacre. This entails setting aside areas for intergenerational conversations, restorative justice procedures, and shared storytelling. Ongoing advocacy, aiding groups and projects that promote racial justice, police reform, voting rights, and the eradication of systemic racism in order to stop further acts of violence, discrimination, and enfranchisement. To build a more just and equitable society, it is crucial to support legislation that addresses issues like economic inequality, educational disparities, and criminal justice reform. To conclude, the Tulsa Massacre serves as a chilling reminder of the pervasive racial injustice that has tarnished American history. As we work to create a society that is more just and equitable, it calls for our focus, consideration, and action. We must remember the lives lost and the devastating effects of the Tulsa Massacre on the Greenwood District and the Black community as a whole as we observe Juneteenth, a day that stands for freedom and liberation. The Tulsa Massacre's impact goes far beyond what happened on those two tragic days in 1921. It resonates across generations, sustaining social injustices, trauma, and economic inequalities. Instead of living in the past, acknowledging this difficult past is a necessary step toward healing and reconciliation. The Tulsa Massacre's historical reality forces us to address the systemic racism that still exists in our society today. As we work to undermine the institutions, policies, and attitudes that support racial inequality, it calls for an honest assessment of these factors. We can challenge the narratives that silence, denial, and historical erasure have created by amplifying the voices and experiences of those who have directly experienced racial violence and oppression. In this process, education is crucial. The depth of racial injustice in the United States can be made clear to future generations by including thorough and accurate history lessons in our educational curricula. Teaching empathy, intolerance, and respect for all races and cultures is essential if we are to create a society that is more compassionate and inclusive. Our dedication to justice and equality, however, cannot end there. We must remain steadfast in our commitment to ongoing advocacy, assisting groups and projects that work to eradicate systemic racism, address economic inequality, reshape the criminal justice system, and defend the right to vote. We can stop further acts of violence, discrimination, and enfranchisement by persistently advocating for change in policies and empowering marginalized communities. Let's celebrate the advancements made in the struggle for freedom and equality on Juneteenth, while also taking time to consider the work that still needs to be done. The Tulsa Massacre serves as a chilling reminder of how important it is to acknowledge and discuss the most sinister facets of our past. By doing this, we can work toward a future in which the atrocities of the past are never again repeated, and every person, regardless of race or background, can prosper and be treated with respect and dignity.